Hi, this is Amy again. I serve as one of the spokespersons for Nehemiah Reset. Today I wanted to talk to you about those books of the Bible known as historical books. 12 books in the Protestant canon of the Old Testament are commonly called the historical books: Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1-2 Samuel, 1-2 Kings, 1-2 Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. This term does not imply that the other books in the Bible, or portions thereof, should not also be considered historical, but describes these 12 books in their largely narrative character as they tell the story of God's dealings with his people over many centuries. They cover Israel's entry into the land of Canaan as a nation, Joshua, the chaotic period of apostasy in the time of the Judges and Ruth, the establishment of the Davidic monarchy, 1-2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles, the history of Israel's life under its kings, 1-2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, and Israel's exile in another land and what happened afterward, Esther and Ezra, Nehemiah. These books were not written to tell history for history's sake but to show how God works through history. Their immediate audience would have been any of God's people in their respective eras, but the preservation of these books centuries beyond shows that their messages endure for all generations. All 12 of the historical books are anonymous. None makes any claim of authorship, and nowhere else in the Bible is there any such claim for these books. A good case can be made for the independent authorship of each, with 1-2 Samuel, 1-2 Kings, 1-2 Chronicles, and Ezra, Nehemiah each considered as one book. The historical background to these books spans close to 1,000 years, beginning with Israel's entry into the land of Canaan around 1400 BC, 1200 BC, depending on an early or late dating of the Exodus. This was a time of great turmoil in Canaan and elsewhere, and the chaos of the time of the Judges should not be surprising against such a backdrop. With the rise of David and the establishment of a monarchy in Israel around 1000 BC, life in the land stabilized. The large empires, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, were relatively quiet at this time, which allowed Israel to be established as a regional power under David and Solomon. However, Solomon's sins prompted God to partition the land, resulting in a divided kingdom, about 930 BC. The kingdoms of Israel, in the north, and Judah, in the south, maintained an uneasy coexistence for about 200 years, until the fall of Israel to the Assyrians in 722 BC. Judah continued as an independent kingdom until the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians in 586 BC. When the Persians under Cyrus conquered Babylon in 539 BC, the Jews were allowed to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple and the city's walls. The final events of the historical books took place in 433 BC, when Nehemiah returned to Jerusalem from Babylon, Nehemiah 13. So what are the basic theological themes of these books? Let's start with the book of Joshua. The book of Joshua describes God giving the promised land of Canaan to his people Israel as an inheritance. The book looks back at the many promises God made to Abraham and his descendants. It also looks ahead as the first account of Israel living in the promised land. Next we have the book of Judges. Judges exposes a deepening apostasy throughout Israel that spirals into spiritual, societal, and political chaos. The book looks ahead to the establishment of a legitimate, God-honoring monarchy, rooted in the ideal king of Deuteronomy 17. Then comes the book of Ruth. This book shows God's providence in the life of one family in David's line. The genealogy at the end of the account connects David with the promises that God gave to Judah centuries earlier and points the way to the establishment of a legitimate monarchy under David. Next we get into 1 and 2 Samuel. This book tells the story of Israel's transition from chaotic life under the Judges, where everyone did right in their own eyes, to life under God's chosen king, David. David was a man after God's own heart, to whom God promised an everlasting throne and lineage, 2 Samuel 7 verse 16. Then we have 1 and 2 Kings. Kings begins with the story of the slow unraveling of the monarchy in David's last days and especially under his son Solomon. Israel divides into two kingdoms, Israel and Judah, until the fall of Israel in 722 BC and the fall of Judah in 586 BC. The tragic ends to these kingdoms are rooted in the continuing unfaithfulness of their kings and people. Yet a few godly kings lead their people back to the Lord, and God's promises to David endure even under perilous circumstances. Then 1st and 2nd Chronicles follow Kings. This book parallels 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, while focusing particularly on David and his descendants, the kings of Judah, ignoring the history of the northern kingdom of Israel. They emphasize godliness, proper worship in the temple, the reward of the righteous, and the punishment of the unrighteous. It ends on the uplifting note that Cyrus had released the Jews from captivity. Then comes Ezra and Nehemiah. The story of post-exilic Judah is told in these closely related books, beginning with the first return of an Israelite remnant from exile in 538 BC. The account narrates the rebuilding of the temple, followed by the ministries of Ezra and Nehemiah about a century later. These two men were instrumental in renewing a discouraged people, encouraging loyalty to God's covenant, rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, and undertaking other reforms. And last we have the Book of Esther. In this book God's unseen hand is seen at work in the lives of Jews in exile, showing his favor through the leadership of Esther and Mordecai. The book does not mention God by name, however, suggesting that his people sometimes need to discern his presence through indirect hints and glimpses. So how do these books relate to the larger biblical narrative and themes? Throughout the historical books, three major Old Testament covenants, the Abrahamic, the Mosaic, and the Davidic covenants, point ahead to the New Covenant. The historical books build on the first two covenants and introduce readers to the third. So what is the Abrahamic covenant? God promised Abraham that he and his descendants would be a blessing to all peoples of the earth, Genesis 12 verses 1-3. This is demonstrated in the stories of Rahab, Ruth, Naaman, and others. All were foreigners who embraced Israel's God and became Israelites, not by virtue of bloodlines, but by their faith, Joshua 2:1-21, Ruth 1 verses 6-18, 2 Kings 5 verses 1-15. Furthermore, the foundations for the Davidic covenant appear in the promises about kings coming from Abraham's line, Genesis 17 verses 6 and 16, 35 verse 11, 49:10. What is the Mosaic covenant? The covenant that God made through Moses, the terms of which are laid out in the law given at Mount Sinai, was to guide Israel in how to live under the umbrella of the Abrahamic covenant. Abraham himself lived in a way that could later be recognized as keeping the law, Genesis 26 verse 5. The Mosaic law was the foundation for true, godly leadership, and Israel's kings were to be rooted in it, Joshua 1 verses 7-9, Deuteronomy 17 verses 18-20. Next, we have the Davidic covenant. In fulfillment of the promises to the patriarchs, God established a kingdom for his people under a godly king, David. The Davidic covenant was God's promise to David that his descendants would rule in Israel forever, 2 Samuel 7 verse 16. There was an important spiritual dimension of this kingdom as well. Compare 1 Chronicles 13 verse 8, 28 verse 5, 29 verse 23, 2 Chr 9:8. The kingdom of Israel was not only a geopolitical entity, but it was also God's kingdom, responsibility for which was vested in the line of David. Specific themes found throughout the rest of the Bible, such as obedience, the consequences of sin, true worship, faithfulness, proper behavior, godly leadership, and prayer, also find expression in the historical books. These books present in narrative form the great truths of the Bible and richly reward careful study. I hope this gives you a quick summary of the Old Testament historical books and the key ideas contained therein. To learn more about other books of the Bible, visit our website at nehemiahreset.org or our rumble.com channel. If you want to support us, like this video and subscribe to our weekly newsletter detailing our recent videos by subscribing at nehemiahreset.org/email. Thanks for watching and have a great day.
Hi, this is Daniel again. The previous video was sponsored by Nehemiah Reset, a 501c3 Bible-believing organization. Our mission is to assist Christians in developing a stronger biblical worldview as it pertains to relevant cultural and biblical issues. We seek to inform Christ followers, equip them, and mobilize them into action to vote their biblical values and to actively engage in our culture locally and at the national level. We are committed to help Christians and non-believers to develop a better biblical worldview. Nehemiah Reset produces videos and ebooks to assist believers and explorers in developing a biblical worldview when it comes to cultural and biblical issues. We produce videos on key topics like public school indoctrination, the woke agenda, sex education, equity and inclusion, climate change, immigration, religious freedom, and lessons that can be learned from key subjects in the Bible. To learn more about Nehemiah Reset or to watch our latest videos, go to our website at nehemiahreset.org or our rumble.com channel. We produce new videos every week. To get a free weekly list of our latest videos, sign up for our weekly newsletter by signing up at nehemiahreset.org/email. You can support our website by liking our videos, subscribing to our channel, or providing donations to help us advertise for new subscribers. Thanks for your help in growing God's kingdom and bringing more people to Christ. Thank you for your support and help. Have a great day.